So today, we're going to dive into something really important, an issue that's quietly affecting so many students and teachers. We're talking about the foundation gap, and it's a hidden crisis happening in our schools.
Just let that sink in for a second. This isn't some made-up scenario. This is what's really happening in classrooms right now. You've got teachers who are beyond frustrated and students who are just falling further and further behind, even though they keep getting promoted to the next grade.
So what is this thing we're calling the foundation gap? Well, it's pretty simple, really. It's the huge chasm that opens up between the grade a student is in and the skills they've actually mastered from previous years. And this gap, it's the root cause of a massive learning crisis.
Okay, so you're probably thinking, wait a minute, if a kid doesn't have the basic skills, how on earth are they passing their exams and moving up? And that, right there, is the trickiest part of this whole crisis. It often stays completely invisible. Let's dig into how that happens.
You know what this slide shows us is how students become masters of playing the game of school without actually learning. They get really good at passing, but not at understanding. They'll guess their way through a multiple-choice test, copy from a friend, or, and this is a big one, just memorize answers word for the exam without having a clue what any of it means. You throw in some generous internal marks, and suddenly a student looks great on paper, all while their learning foundation is just crumbling beneath them.
So that leads us to the million-dollar question. Why? How did we even get to this point? And look, this is not about blaming the students. It's not even about blaming the teachers. This is a systemic problem, and it has some really deep roots.
The whole thing usually starts way back in the early years of school, when a student gets pushed ahead without truly mastering the absolute basics, like reading, writing, or simple math. That's the first crack in their foundation. And every year after that, they're just building on top of shaky ground.
And then you have policies that, are meant to help but can actually make things worse. Things like automatic promotion. The idea behind it is good, but what happens is a student's lack of understanding just gets passed on to the next teacher, and the next. That foundation gap just gets wider and wider because nobody ever stops to fix it.
Then, of course, there's what happens when the school day is over. Learning isn't a one-and-done thing. It needs to be reinforced. If there's not much practice or revision happening at home, those concepts from class just kind of fade away. This is such a huge piece of the puzzle.
And yeah, we have to talk about the elephant in the room. Distractions. It's just incredibly tough for homework to compete with the endless entertainment packed into a smartphone. All that time spent scrolling and watching videos. That's the exact same time that's desperately needed for studying and review.
And finally, let's be realistic about what's happening inside the classroom. When you have huge class sizes and a curriculum that's packed to the brim, even the best, most dedicated teacher is going to struggle to give every kid the one-on-one attention they need. There's just not enough hours in the day to patch up every single learning gap.
This slide right here, it just hits the nail on the head. It shows the real tension perfectly. The whole system starts to focus on one thing, passing exams. But what we actually need is for students to have deep conceptual learning. And when the goal and the need don't line up, the foundation gap is pretty much what you're going to get.
Okay, so we've spent a lot of time on the problem, but what's the solution? The great news is there are real practical things we can do that make a huge difference. So let's open up the toolkit and see what we've got for building a stronger foundation.
Let's start with something that sounds almost too simple, but trust me, it's a game changer. The daily 5-minute revision rule. Just imagine if every single class, every single day, started with a super quick review of the most important basics. This tiny habit builds that foundational knowledge over and over again, making sure it's rock solid before you try to build anything new on top of it.
But that's just for starters. This toolkit is loaded with awesome ideas for the classroom. You start with something called a diagnostic assessment, which is basically just figuring out exactly where each student's gaps are. Then you can run short bridge courses every day to fix those gaps, or use spiral teaching to keep revisiting the basics before you move on. And you make it fun. Use peer learning, where students help each other, or activity-based learning with games and quizzes. And the key is to tie it all together with micro-learning goals, small, achievable wins that build a student's confidence.
So you see the pattern here, right? For every single one of these big challenges, there's a practical, doable solution. If kids are just memorizing, you switch to teaching the concepts. If they're bored and checked out, you bring in fun activities. If you've got a classroom with a huge range of skill levels, you start by figuring out where everyone is with a diagnostic assessment. It's all about being strategic.
Now, here's the thing.
Teachers can't do this all by themselves. The real solution needs a powerful partnership with the other super important person in a child's education, the parent. When home and school are on the same team, that's when you start to see real, lasting change.
At the end of the day, fixing the foundation gap isn't just one person's job. It takes a shared vision. It takes everyone, teachers, parents, the school itself, all working together for the exact same goal, making sure every single child gets to experience deep, meaningful learning.
I really want this message to hit home. It just completely changes how we look at the issue, doesn't it? It takes the blame off the student for being weak and puts the focus where it belongs, on the real problem, which is the missing foundation. And that's a problem we can actually solve.
And that's the most hopeful part of this entire story. This is not some impossible crisis. When you get everyone working together with dedication and the right game plan, we can rebuild those foundations. We can empower every single student to become confident, capable, and successful.
So I'm going to leave you with this one thought. The next time you're talking to your kid about their day, try not to just ask, "How is school?" Instead, ask them this simple but really powerful question. It's a question that puts the focus on growth, not just grades, and it's the very first step we can all take in building that foundation together.